Rain hammered against the windows of the Sinclair mansion, nature's persistent attempt to breach the fortress of wealth and isolation. Michael Sinclair sat in his office, bathed in the cold glow of his computer screen. Financial projections and quarterly reports filled the display, reducing the world to digits and percentages. At 38, he had everything society valued: money, power, respect. The CEO of Sinclair Technologies lived in a mansion far too large for a single occupant, his social calendar consisting solely of business meetings and corporate dinners. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, its deep resonance echoing through the empty rooms. Michael adjusted his reading glasses and continued analyzing the final report of the evening. One more hour, he thought. Just one more hour and he would be done. A flash of lightning illuminated the immaculate garden through the French windows. The thunder that followed made the house tremble slightly, as though reminding Michael of its vulnerability despite its grandeur. Then came the sound, faint against the roar of the storm, but distinct. A knocking at the front door. Michael frowned. Who would be at his door at 10 at night in the middle of a storm? The intercom had not rung, which meant someone had somehow bypassed the main gate security. Perhaps an emergency involving one of the staff members. The knock came again, more insistent this time. With an irritated sigh, Michael stood up and crossed the entrance hall. He was not expecting visitors, and he detested surprises. He switched on the exterior light and opened the door, his face already arranged in an expression of stern inquiry. What he saw left him momentarily speechless. A girl of about 5 stood before him, soaked to the skin. Her brown hair clung to her face like seaweed, and she clutched an equally drenched backpack to her chest. She was visibly shivering, looking up at him with large brown eyes that, despite her obvious exhaustion, shone with a strange determination. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, confused by the presence of this unaccompanied child on his doorstep. The girl swallowed hard, still trembling. Then she said something that made the ground shift beneath Michael's feet. "You are Michael Sinclair, right?" She paused as though gathering courage. "I am Sophie. You are my dad." Michael felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. His first instinct was to slam the door and pretend this was not happening. A mistake, a prank, some kind of elaborate scam. "I think you are mistaken," he replied coolly, but he could not close the door. The girl Sophie looked so fragile under the relentless rain. Her lips were turning slightly blue from the cold. "Mom said you would not know about me," she continued, her voice small but firm. "She said if something happened to her, I should come find you." Michael still held the doorknob, torn between suspicion and a strange feeling that he could not simply ignore this situation. "Where is your mother?" he asked, trying to remain cautious. Sophie lowered her eyes for the first time. "I do not know. We were together at the shopping mall near our hotel, and then there were lots of people, and I got separated from her. I waited, but she did not come back." Another clap of thunder shook the sky, making the girl shrink back. Michael looked past her at the storm that seemed to grow worse by the minute. He could not just send her away, even if her story sounded fabricated. No child should be alone on a night like this. "How did you get here?" Michael asked, still not fully opening the door. "By taxi," Sophie replied. "Mom taught me your address. She said I should memorize it just in case." She reached into the pocket of her soaked jacket and pulled out some crumpled wet bills. "I used the emergency money." Michael hesitated a moment longer. Part of him, the cold, rational part that had propelled him to the top of the corporate world, said this was some kind of trap, that he should call the police immediately, that he should not get involved. But another part, one that rarely spoke up, could not leave this child shivering in the rain. "Come in," he finally said, opening the door wider. "We will figure this out." Sophie took a small, hesitant step into the foyer, leaving a puddle on the marble floor. She looked even smaller beneath the bright chandelier. "What is your mom's full name?" Michael asked as he closed the door behind her. "Rachel Taylor," Sophie answered promptly. Michael frowned. The name meant absolutely nothing to him. He was certain he had never been with anyone named Rachel Taylor, or at least he could not recall such a person. Sophie sneezed, bringing Michael back to the present moment. Whatever the truth was, the girl needed dry clothes and something warm to eat. "Let us go upstairs," he said, his tone still distant. "You need to dry off before we both catch a cold." Sophie nodded, following him up the wide staircase to the second floor. Her wet footprints left a trail on the carpet, and Michael tried not to think about what his housekeeper would say in the morning. The Sinclair mansion had 5 guest suites, all impeccably maintained despite rarely being used. Michael led Sophie to the smallest one, turned on the lights, and opened the built-in closet. "I do not have any kids' clothes, obviously," he said, pulling out a plain white t-shirt. "This will have to do as a nightgown for now. The bathroom is over there. Take a hot bath and dry off well." Sophie took the t-shirt gingerly as though it was something precious. "Thank you," she mumbled, so quietly Michael almost did not hear her. "I will get you something to eat," he said, heading toward the door. "I will be downstairs when you are finished." On his way back down, Michael took his phone out of his pocket and considered calling the police right away. A lost child was something the authorities should handle, not him, but something nagged at him. Rachel Taylor. He tried again to match the name with a face of memory. Nothing. Still, Sophie's claim that he was her father demanded a firmer response than simply sending her away. If it were true, and he seriously doubted it, it would create unimaginable complications for his carefully controlled life. If it were false, he still had to figure out what was really going on. In the kitchen, he gathered some ingredients to make a sandwich and heat up soup. It was not much, but it would warm the girl up. While the water boiled, Michael found himself staring at the window, seeing only the reflection of his own tense face. He called Frank Reynolds, his head of security at Sinclair Technologies. Despite the late hour, Frank answered on the second ring. "Mr. Sinclair." "Frank, I need you to run a background check immediately." Michael explained the situation in brief clinical terms. "The name is Rachel Taylor. The child claims she is my daughter. I need everything you can find." "Will do, sir." "And the child?" "Should I contact child services?" Michael paused. "Not yet. First, I want to verify her story. See if there really was a missing child report filed at any shopping mall today. See if this Rachel Taylor actually exists." After ending the call, Michael prepared a simple meal. 15 minutes later, Sophie appeared at the kitchen door. The white t-shirt came down to her knees and her still damp hair was darker than Michael had first noticed. She seemed less frightened now, but still vulnerable in a way that made him uneasy. "Take a seat," he indicated one of the high stools by the counter. Sophie obeyed, climbing up with some difficulty. Her bare feet swung, unable to reach the footrest. Michael placed the sandwich and soup in front of her. "How did you know where to find me?" he asked while she started eating with obvious hunger. Between bites, Sophie replied, "Mom always knew where you lived. She said it was important that I know in case I ever needed you." "And why would you need me?" Michael pressed, watching her closely. Sophie shrugged, focusing on the food. "Because you are my dad. That is what Mom said." Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Sophie, I do not know your mother. I think there is some misunderstanding here." The girl looked up from her plate. "She said you would say that." "And what else did she say?" Michael asked, crossing his arms. Sophie took a spoonful of soup before answering. "That you would not remember her. That it was a long time ago, but if she could not take care of me, you would, because deep down you are a good man." Michael felt strangely uneasy at that statement. A good man. It had been a while since anyone used those words to describe him. "I will call the police in the morning," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "They will know how to find your mother." Sophie did not protest. She just nodded slightly as she continued eating. She looked exhausted. "Where do you and your mom live?" Michael tried again. "We move a lot," Sophie replied vaguely. "We were staying in a hotel near here this week." She took another bite. "And before that, Portland. And before that, Denver." Michael realized he would not get anywhere with this interrogation. The girl was clearly too tired for a coherent conversation. "I am done," she said, pushing away her empty plate. "Thank you for the food." Michael took the dishes to the sink. "Come on, I will take you back to the guest room. We will figure all this out tomorrow." On the way back, Michael noticed how Sophie looked around with curiosity at the paintings on the walls, the sculptures in the niches, the sheer size of the rooms. It seemed she was memorizing every detail. "Here we are," he said, opening the door to the guest room. "Everything you need is in the bathroom. If you need anything during the night, my room is the last one at the end of the hallway on the right." Sophie climbed onto the bed, which was far too big for her, and settled among the pillows. "Will Mom find me?" she asked, showing the first real sign of vulnerability Michael had seen since her arrival. "We will find her," he responded, not promising too much. "Just rest now." He was about to leave when Sophie's small voice stopped him. She said you were a good man. Michael paused, not turning around. But she said you forgot who you really were, Sophie added almost in a whisper. An inexplicable chill ran down Michael's spine. He turned to answer, but Sophie was already settled among the pillows, eyes closed. He turned off the light, leaving only the bedside lamp on, and quietly closed the door. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall for a moment, suddenly breathless. Forgot who he really was. Those words lingered as he returned to his office. The rain still pounded mercilessly outside, but now there was something more unsettling than the storm. His absolute certainty that he had never met anyone named Rachel Taylor was beginning to fade, replaced by a restlessness he could not name. He sat down at his computer again, but financial reports no longer mattered. He opened a new browser window and typed in the name that would not leave his mind, Rachel Taylor. The search was just beginning, along with the strangest night of his life. Upstairs, asleep in the guest room, the little girl who claimed to be his daughter had brought far more than a soaked backpack. She had brought questions for which Michael was no longer sure he wanted answers. The phone rang just after midnight. It was Frank Reynolds. "Mr. Sinclair, I have preliminary information." Michael straightened in his chair. "Go ahead." There was indeed a missing person report filed today at the Westlake Center. A woman named Rachel Taylor reported separated from her daughter Sophie, age 5. Mall security confirmed the incident. The woman was last seen around 4:30 p.m., appearing distressed and searching for her daughter. Michael felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. And the daughter? No record of the child being found by mall security or police, which aligns with the girl's story that she made her way to you independently. "What else do you have on Rachel Taylor?" "Still gathering information, sir. Facial recognition pulled her image from mall security cameras. She appears to be in her mid-30s, brown hair, approximately 5'6". I am sending the image to your phone now." Michael's phone chimed with an incoming message. He opened it to see a somewhat grainy security camera image of a woman looking anxiously around a crowded mall. Brown hair, delicate features. He studied the face, searching for any hint of recognition, any spark of memory. Nothing came. "I will have more information by morning," Frank continued, "including a thorough background check." "Thank you, Frank. Also, I want a DNA test arranged for tomorrow, as soon as possible." "Understood, sir. I will make the necessary arrangements." After hanging up, Michael sat motionless, staring at the image on his phone. So Rachel Taylor was real, and she had indeed lost her daughter at the mall today. But that did not explain how Sophie could be his child, or why he had no recollection of her mother. The following morning, Michael woke after only a few hours of restless sleep. For a moment, he wondered if the strange events of the previous night had been a dream. Then he heard the faint sound of a television from down the hall. Sophie was sitting cross-legged on the large bed, watching cartoons. She had wrapped herself in the duvet, creating a small fortress of comfort. When she saw Michael at the door, she smiled tentatively. "Good morning," she said, as if she had been living in his house 4 years. "Good morning," Michael replied, momentarily unsure how to proceed. "Did you sleep well?" Sophie nodded. "The bed is really big. I almost got lost in it." Michael found himself smiling slightly at that. "Are you hungry? We can go down for breakfast." In the kitchen, Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, was already preparing breakfast. She raised an eyebrow at the sight of Sophie, but to her credit made no comment about the unexpected child in her employer's home. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Sophie. She will be staying with us for a while," Michael said, not offering further explanation. "Good morning, young lady," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Would you like pancakes for breakfast?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Michael watched as Mrs. Patterson effortlessly engaged with Sophie, showing her how to mix the batter and explaining why the first pancake never turns out quite right. He had never seen this side of his efficient but usually reserved housekeeper. While Sophie was distracted, Michael discreetly explained to Mrs. Patterson that Sophie was temporarily in his care while authorities located her mother. He did not mention the girl's claim about being his daughter. That was a complication he was not ready to share with his staff. After breakfast, Michael received a call from Frank. "I have arranged for the DNA test, sir. The technician can be at your home at 11. "Perfect," Michael said. "What else have you found out?" "The background check on Rachel Taylor has turned up something interesting. The woman has virtually no digital footprint prior to 6 years ago. No social media, minimal credit history, few permanent addresses. She seems to move every 8 to 10 months. That seems unusual, Michael remarked. Very, almost as if she is intentionally staying off the grid. There is more. I found records suggesting she has used multiple names over the years. Rachel Taylor appears to be just one of them. Michael frowned. Multiple identities? Who is this woman? I am still piecing that together, sir. But there is one more thing you should know. 6 years ago, a woman named Rachel Wilson was a linguistics professor at the University of Washington. She published academic papers, had a promising career, and then suddenly resigned and disappeared from academia. The timing coincides with when Rachel Taylor first appears in records. And you believe Rachel Wilson and Rachel Taylor are the same person. The physical resemblance from available photos is striking. I am confident they are the same individual. Michael glanced toward the kitchen where Sophie was still helping Mrs. Patterson with breakfast. A linguistics professor who suddenly changes her identity and spends years moving from place to place. And somewhere in that time, she has a child she claims is mine. It appears so, sir. Keep digging, Frank. I want to know everything about this woman. The DNA test was conducted that morning. A nurse from a private medical facility arrived at the mansion, took cheek swab samples from both Michael and Sophie, and promised results within 48 hours. Sophie showed no anxiety about the procedure while Michael could barely contain his tension. Throughout the day, Michael attempted to work from his home office, but his concentration kept slipping. He found himself checking on Sophie periodically. Mrs. Patterson had provided her with coloring books and puzzles, keeping her occupied. The girl seemed remarkably adaptable to her strange circumstances, as if staying in a stranger's mansion was a perfectly normal occurrence. In the afternoon, Michael received a call that the police had begun searching for Rachel Taylor. The security footage from the mall showed her becoming agitated after losing sight of Sophie, then suddenly looking at something off camera. Her expression had changed to one of fear, and she had quickly moved away, disappearing from view. The police were treating it as a missing persons case with potentially suspicious circumstances. That evening after dinner, Sophie asked if Michael played the piano. The question caught him off guard. "How did you know I play?" he asked. "Mom told me. She said you play a pretty song with Moon in the name." Michael stared at her, a strange sensation crawling up his spine. "Claire de Lune," he murmured the words, slipping out before he could stop them. "Yes," Sophie's eyes widened. "How did you know?" Michael had no explanation. It was indeed his favorite piece, one he had played for years. But how could Rachel know this personal detail? The connection between Claire de Lune and Rachel gave him an odd feeling of familiarity that he could not place. "Would you play it for me?" Sophie asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. Michael hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the music room, a space he rarely visited anymore. The grand piano stood there, covered in a thin layer of dust. On a whim, he removed the cover and sat down on the bench. His hands hovered over the keys, hesitant. He was so absorbed that he did not notice Sophie watching with fascination until he began to play. The first notes were stiff, his fingers out of practice, but gradually muscle memory took over. The music flowed, filling the room with its haunting beauty. Sophie climbed onto the bench beside him, her small body radiating warmth next to his. She watched his hands move across the keys with utter fascination, her mouth slightly open in wonder. "It sounds like fairy music," she whispered. Michael continued playing, letting the music fill him. With each note, he felt something stir inside. Not exactly a memory, but an emotion buried deep and now fighting to surface. When he finished, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. "Again," Sophie requested, clapping her hands. Michael smiled slightly, a genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. "Maybe later. It is getting late. Time for bed." As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, she looked at him with those searching eyes that seemed too knowing for a 5-year-old. "Are you going to find my mom tomorrow?" "We are doing everything we can," Michael replied honestly. "A lot of people are looking for her now." Sophie nodded solemnly. Then, to his complete surprise, she held out her pinky finger. "Pinky promise." Michael hesitated before hooking his own pinky with hers. "Pinky promise." After Sophie fell asleep, Michael returned to his office where the reports on Rachel Taylor were scattered across his desk. Photos, documents, fragments of a life inexplicably tied to his. He picked up one of the security camera photos studying the woman's face. Rachel, the name echoed yet in his mind, sparking that same strange sensation. Familiarity without a specific recollection, like a dream evaporating upon waking. "Where are you?" he murmured at the photograph. And what happened between us? The mansion was quiet around him. Somewhere above his daughter, it was still strange to think of her that way, slept soundly. And somewhere out there, the woman who knew his secrets, his preferences, his music was still missing. Tomorrow he would resume the search. Tomorrow maybe he would be one step closer to understanding how he had lost not just a woman, but also 5 years of his own daughter's life, and perhaps a part of himself too. 2 days after Sophie's arrival, while she was having a reading lesson with Mrs. Patterson, Michael received the call he had been both hoping for and dreading. "Mr. Sinclair," the lab doctor's voice sounded formal on the other end of the line. "We have the preliminary results of the paternity test." Michael's mouth went dry. "And the probability of paternity is greater than 9.9%. There is no doubt the girl is your biological daughter." The world seemed to slow around Michael. The words echoed in his mind, but they did not fully register. His biological daughter, a 99.9% certainty. How was that possible? How could he have a 5-year-old daughter and not remember her mother? "Mr. Sinclair, are you there?" The doctor's voice snapped him back. "Yes, thank you for the result. Send the full report to my email." Michael hung up and remained motionless for several minutes, staring at the office wall without really seeing it. Then slowly he walked to the living room where Sophie was reading a book with Mrs. Patterson. She immediately sensed his presence, and something in his expression must have betrayed his state of shock. "They called about the test, did not they?" she asked simply. Michael nodded, still at a loss for words. Sophie smiled, not triumphantly, but with relief. "I knew it." "How?" The question slipped out almost as an accusation. "How did you know if I did not even know? How can I have a daughter and not remember?" Sophie's expression changed, surprisingly mature for a 5-year-old. "Mom said you would not remember. She said it was complicated." Complicated? Michael almost laughed in empty sound. "Having a daughter and forgetting about her is more than complicated, Sophie. It is impossible." Sophie turned to Mrs. Patterson. "Can I go color now? I finished reading." The housekeeper, sensing the tension, nodded and watched as Sophie left the room. Once they were alone, she spoke softly. "Mr. Sinclair, is everything all right?" Michael ran a hand through his hair. "The DNA test confirms she is my daughter." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "I see. And the mother?" "Still missing. And apparently there is a reason I do not remember her." Michael shook his head. "I need some time alone, Mrs. Patterson. Please keep an eye on Sophie." In his office, Michael closed the door and sat heavily in his chair. A daughter? He had a daughter. The evidence was irrefutable, but the implications were staggering. If Sophie was truly his child, conceived about 6 years ago, why did he have no recollection of Rachel? What had happened to erase an entire relationship from his memory? With trembling fingers, he opened his computer and began searching through his personal files. Medical records, insurance claims, anything that might provide a clue. And there it was, buried in an old folder he rarely accessed. A medical report dated 6 years ago. As he read through the document, a cold realization washed over him. 6 years ago, he had been involved in a serious car accident. The report detailed the injuries: multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and most significantly, a traumatic brain injury. One paragraph stood out from the rest. Patient presents with partial retrograde amnesia, primarily affecting memories from the 14 months prior to the accident. Cognitive function otherwise preserved. Amnesia. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. 14 months of his life erased. 14 months during which apparently he had met Rachel, formed a relationship with her, and conceived a child. Michael scrolled through the report, his heart racing. The accident had occurred after a late-night drive in heavy rain. His car had veered off the road and collided with a tree. He had spent 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by months of physical therapy for his injuries. But nowhere in his recollection was there any mention of memory loss or amnesia. Had he known and forgotten that too? Or had someone deliberately kept this information from him? The final page of the report contained a note. During hospitalization, patient was visited daily by family members. No other visitors were allowed at the request of the Sinclair family. Michael felt a surge of anger. His family. Of course, Victor Sinclair, his father, the controlling patriarch who had micromanaged every aspect of Michael's life. Had his father known about Rachel? Had he deliberately kept her away during Michael's recovery? That night, after ensuring Sophie was asleep, Michael called his sister Catherine. Unlike his father and brother, Catherine had always been the most honest member of the family. Michael, is everything okay? It is nearly midnight. Catherine's voice was concerned. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Michael said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 6 years ago, after my car accident, did you know I had amnesia? There was a long pause on the line. Michael, just answer the question, Catherine. His sister sighed heavily. Yes, I knew. We all knew. The doctors told us you had lost some memories from before the accident. And did you know about a woman named Rachel Taylor, or possibly Rachel Wilson? Another pause longer this time. Michael, I think you should talk to Father about this. So you did know, Michael concluded. You knew I had a relationship with this woman, and none of you told me when I woke up with no memory of her. It was not my decision, Catherine said quietly. Father said it was for your own good, that you were better off not remembering certain things. That it would complicate your recovery. I have a daughter, Catherine, Michael said, the words still strange on his tongue. A 5-year-old daughter with a woman I do not remember. Did you know that too? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. My God, Michael whispered. How could you all keep this from me? Michael, please. Catherine's voice was pleading now. It was complicated. This woman, she was not. Father did not think she was suitable. When you had the accident, he saw it as an opportunity to fix things. Fix things, Michael's voice rose in anger, by erasing the mother of my child from my life, by denying me the knowledge that I had a daughter. I do not think Father knew about the child, Catherine said quickly. At least he never mentioned it to me. Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I want you to tell Father that I know. Tell him that Sophie is here with me and that I want answers. Tell him I want the truth, all of it. He hung up before Catherine could respond. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, forming a picture that filled him with rage. His own family had exploited his amnesia, deliberately keeping him from Rachel and, by extension, from his daughter. They had rewritten his life according to their preferences, erasing what they deemed unsuitable. The following morning, Michael watched Sophie at breakfast, seeing her in a new light, his daughter. The test confirmed it beyond any doubt. He noticed details he had missed before: the shape of her eyes similar to his, the determined set of her jaw when concentrating, a trait he recognized from his own reflection. Sophie, he began carefully, can you tell me more about your mom? What she likes, what she does? Sophie looked up from her pancakes. She likes books, lots and lots of books, and she speaks different languages sometimes. She teaches me words. Your mom was a professor once, did you know that? Michael asked. Sophie nodded. Before I was born, she showed me pictures from her university. She wore funny clothes with a flat hat. Do you know why she stopped teaching? Sophie shrugged. She said we needed to move around. She said it was an adventure, but sometimes she looks sad when we have to leave places. And she never told you why you move so much. She said it is to keep us safe, Sophie replied, then added in a smaller voice, from the bad people. Michael felt a chill. What bad people, Sophie? I do not know, but Mom always checks outside before we go anywhere. And sometimes she sees someone that scares her and we have to leave right away, in the middle of the night sometimes. The picture forming in Michael's mind was disturbing. Rachel had been running, hiding, changing identities. And based on what Catherine had reluctantly revealed, it seemed the Sinclair family, particularly his father, had played a role in driving her away. Just then, Frank called with new information. Mr. Sinclair, we have traced a pattern of movement for Rachel Taylor over the past 5 years. She has lived in at least 8 different cities using various names. The interesting part is that witnesses in several locations describe her as constantly vigilant, always seeming to look over her shoulder. She was running from someone, Michael said. It appears so, sir. A woman in Portland who knew her as Rachel Bradford said she once mentioned being pursued by someone powerful, someone who could buy anyone. The implication was clear. Someone with the resources and influence of the Sinclair family. There is more, sir, Frank continued. We found this in Seattle. Rachel worked at a bookstore for a few weeks about 2 months ago under the name Claire Reynolds. The owner kept this when she left abruptly. What is it? Michael asked. A photograph. I am sending it to your phone now. Michael's phone chimed with an incoming message. When he opened it, his heart seemed to stop for a moment. The photo showed a young woman, undoubtedly Rachel, sitting on a park bench. Next to her was a small girl, clearly Sophie, about 3 years old in the picture. They were both smiling at the camera. On the back, a date from 2 years prior and a single handwritten word: remember. Remember. The word struck Michael like a physical blow. What was Rachel trying to tell him? What was he supposed to remember, Mr. Sinclair? There is one more detail that might interest you, Frank said. The bookstore owner mentioned that Rachel regularly visited a particular cafe, Blue Moon, almost every day. A cafe? Michael frowned, the name triggering something in his mind. Yes. And here's the interesting part. The Blue Moon was less than a mile from your old apartment on your route to the office. According to credit card records, you were a regular customer there 6 years ago. Double Americano, no sugar. The memory surfaced unbidden, a coffee order he had maintained for years. The Blue Moon Cafe, a place where he might have met a linguistics professor named Rachel Wilson, who would later become Rachel Taylor, the mother of his child. The pieces were falling into place, forming a narrative both compelling and disturbing. 6 years ago, Michael had met Rachel at the Blue Moon Cafe. They had formed a relationship significant enough to result in a child. Then came the accident, the amnesia, and his family's intervention. Rachel, pregnant and spurned, had been forced into a life on the run, constantly changing identities to protect herself and their daughter from the reach of the Sinclair family. And now, perhaps feeling that her evasion was coming to an end, she had prepared Sophie to find her father. A father who until 2 days ago had no idea she existed. As Michael looked at the photograph again, at the faces of Rachel and Sophie, smiling in the sunlight of a moment captured 2 years ago, he made a silent vow. He would find Rachel. He would recover his memories. He would learn the truth no matter how painful it might be. Because for the first time in his adult life, something mattered more than work, success, or the Sinclair family's expectations. That little girl finishing her breakfast with maple syrup on her chin, she deserved answers. And if that meant facing his family, challenging the powerful Victor Sinclair, and diving into the blank space in his own memory, then that was exactly what he would do. 3 days had passed since Sophie's arrival at the Sinclair mansion. 3 days of uncertainty, investigation, and a growing sense that Michael's carefully ordered life had been built on a foundation of lies. The DNA test had confirmed what Sophie had claimed from the beginning: she was his daughter. But that simple biological fact had opened a floodgate of questions that threatened to drown him. Michael sat in his home office surrounded by files and photographs. The revelation about his amnesia had sent him digging through old medical records, insurance claims, anything that might provide answers. On his computer screen was a medical report he had read a dozen times, the words now burned into his mind. Severe traumatic brain injury resulting from a car accident. Patient presents with partial retrograde amnesia, primarily affecting memories from the 14 months prior to the accident. 14 months, more than a year of his life wiped away. A year that apparently had included meeting Rachel Taylor, forming a relationship with her, and conceiving a child. How was it possible that no one had told him about this amnesia? How had he lived for 6 years without realizing a chunk of his memory was missing? The soft patter of small feet in the hallway drew his attention. Sophie appeared at the door clutching a stuffed bear Mrs. Patterson had found in one of the storage rooms. "Are you working?" she asked, her voice small and hesitant. Michael closed the medical file on his screen. "Not really. Do you need something?" Sophie shook her head, then nodded, then shrugged, a series of contradictory movements that betrayed her uncertainty. "Mrs. Patterson is making cookies. She said I should ask if you want to help." The old Michael would have dismissed the invitation immediately. Cookies were not part of the precise machinery of his life, but the man he was becoming paused, looking at the earnest face of his daughter. His daughter. The phrase still felt foreign in his mind. "I have never made cookies before," he admitted. Sophie's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Never, not even when you were little?" "Not that I remember." The irony of those words was not lost on him. "Then you have to learn," Sophie declared, with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old. She stepped forward and took his hand, tugging him toward the door. "It is very important to know how to make cookies." Michael found himself following her down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Patterson was arranging ingredients on the marble counter. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow at the sight of her employer, but said nothing about his unexpected participation. Sophie tells me I need to learn how to make cookies, Michael said, feeling oddly self-conscious. Mrs. Patterson smiled. Everyone should know how to make cookies, Mr. Sinclair. It is a basic life skill. For the next hour, Michael Sinclair, CEO of a billion-dollar technology company, found himself dusted with flour measuring, vanilla extract, and learning the proper technique for forming chocolate chip cookies. Sophie stood beside him on a step stool offering expert advice despite her height disadvantage. You have to press this down a little, she instructed seriously, and leave space because they grow in the oven. They grow, Michael asked, playing along. Not like plants, Sophie giggled. They just get bigger. Mom says it is science, but I think it is magic. The mention of Rachel sent a familiar pang through Michael's chest. Somewhere out there was a woman who knew him better than he knew himself. A woman who had raised their daughter alone, teaching her about cookie magic and piano music and everything else Sophie knew. While the cookies baked, filling the kitchen with a warm, sweet aroma, Michael's phone rang. It was Frank Reynolds. Mr. Sinclair, I have found something significant. Frank said, his voice tight with urgency. I need to come by and show you in person. I will be in my office, Michael replied, ending the call. He turned to Sophie, who was watching the cookies through the oven window with rapt attention. Sophie, I need to work for a little while. Will you be okay with Mrs. Patterson? Sophie nodded without looking away from the oven. We need to watch them so they do not burn. It is very important. Michael smiled despite himself. Very important indeed. In his office, Michael paced while waiting for Frank. The head of security arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a folder and looking grim. What have you found? Michael asked without preamble. Frank placed the folder on the desk. I tracked down Rachel Taylor's movements over the past 6 years. She has used at least 6 different identities that we can confirm. She moves frequently, never staying in one place more than 8 to 10 months. She is running from someone, Michael said. It was not a question. Yes, sir, and I believe that someone is your family. Frank opened the folder and spread out several documents. 6 years ago, Rachel Wilson was a respected linguistics professor at the University of Washington. She published papers, attended conferences, had a promising career. Then approximately 5.5 years ago, she resigned abruptly and disappeared from academia. Michael examined a photograph of Rachel in an academic setting, standing with colleagues at what appeared to be a university function. She looked different from the mall security footage, more relaxed, her smile reaching her eyes. Something about that smile tugged at him, stirring a sensation in his chest that was not quite memory. 5.5 years ago, Michael murmured. That would have been right after my accident. Frank nodded. I found a former colleague who kept in touch with her briefly after she left. According to this person, Rachel was pregnant when she resigned. She mentioned being concerned about the father of her child, saying he had been in an accident and his family was preventing her from seeing him. The implications landed like a physical blow. My family knew about Rachel and the pregnancy. It appears so, sir. There is more. Frank hesitated. I found a witness in Portland who knew Rachel as Claire Bradford. This witness said Rachel once mentioned being pursued by someone powerful, someone who could buy anyone. She was afraid they might hurt her daughter. Michael felt sick. The picture emerging was disturbing in its clarity. His family, particularly his father, had discovered his relationship with Rachel. They had disapproved, perhaps because she was a professor rather than someone from their social circle. When Michael had the accident, they had seized the opportunity presented by his amnesia to erase her from his life. And Rachel, pregnant and alone, had been forced into hiding constantly, changing her identity to protect their daughter from the long reach of the Sinclair family. There is one last thing, Frank said, pulling a photograph from the folder. We found this in Seattle. Rachel worked at a bookstore for a few weeks under the name Claire Reynolds. The owner kept this when she left abruptly. Michael took the photograph. It showed Rachel sitting on a park bench with a younger Sophie, perhaps 3 years old. They were smiling at the camera, a snapshot of happiness stolen from a life spent running. On the back it was written a single word, remember. Remember, Michael repeated the word, feeling like a key searching for its lock. Frank nodded. The bookstore owner also mentioned that Rachel frequently visited a cafe called Blue Moon, not far from your old apartment. According to your credit card records from 6 years ago, you were a regular customer there. Blue Moon Cafe. The name triggered something to a wisp of memory that dissolved as soon as he tried to grasp it. Had that been where they met, a chance encounter between a tech executive and a linguistics professor over coffee? "I want you to continue the search for Rachel," Michael said, his voice hard with determination. "And Frank, this stays between us. No one else in the company is to know, especially anyone with connections to my father." "Understood, sir." After Frank left, Michael returned to the kitchen, where Sophie and Mrs. Patterson were arranging freshly baked cookies on a cooling rack. Sophie looked up with pride. "We did not burn any of them," she announced. "And I made a special one for you. Oh, it has extra chocolate chips." Michael accepted the slightly misshapen cookie she offered. It was still warm, the chocolate soft and melting. As he took a bite, Sophie watched his reaction with such intensity that he found himself exaggerating his enjoyment. "This might be the best cookie I have ever tasted," he declared. Sophie beamed. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around his waist in a quick, fierce hug before returning to the cookies as if nothing had happened. Michael stood frozen, the simple gesture of affection having caught him completely off guard. When was the last time anyone had hugged him? Not a formal embrace at a family function or the calculated touch of a romantic interest, but a genuine expression of unconditional affection that night. After putting Sophie to bed with what had become their nightly ritual of 2 bedtime stories and checking under the bed for monsters, Michael made a phone call to Dr. Benjamin Carter, a neurologist whose name he had found in his medical records. "Mr. Sinclair," the doctor greeted him, sounding surprised. "It has been years. How can I help you?" "I recently discovered something disturbing in my medical records," Michael said without preamble. "6 years ago, after my car accident, I suffered from retrograde amnesia affecting the 14 months prior to the accident. Why was I never informed of this condition?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Sinclair, I personally discussed your amnesia with you on several occasions during your recovery, and more extensively with your family." Michael felt a chill. "I have no recollection of these discussions." "That is not uncommon," Dr. Carter replied. "Patients with traumatic brain injuries often have difficulties forming new memories immediately after the trauma. You may have been told about your amnesia, but failed to retain that information. Your father assured me he would explain your condition once you were more stable." "My father," Michael repeated, the pieces falling into place. "Tell me, doctor, were there any visitors to my hospital room besides family members?" Another pause. "Your father was quite specific about restricting visitors to family only. He was concerned about your mental state, insisted that unfamiliar faces might impede your recovery. Was there a woman who tried to visit, perhaps named Rachel?" "I cannot disclose specific information about other individuals due to privacy concerns," Dr. Carter said carefully. "But I can tell you that, yes, there was someone who made repeated attempts to see you. Your father was adamant that this person be turned away." Michael closed his eyes, a surge of anger washing through him. "I see. One more question, doctor. Is it possible for me to recover the memories I lost?" "Retrograde amnesia following traumatic brain injury is complex," Dr. Carter explained. "Some patients experience spontaneous recovery of memories over time. Others may recover fragments through exposure to strong sensory triggers associated with the lost memories. Music sense locations that were significant. I could refer you to a specialist in memory recovery therapy if you are interested." "Please do," Michael said, "as soon as possible." The following day, Michael arranged to work from home, unwilling to leave Sophie with just Mrs. Patterson. He had a growing sense that his family might intervene once they learned he was investigating his past with Rachel. Catherine would have told their father about his phone call by now. Victor Sinclair was not a man who tolerated challenges to his authority, even from his own children. In the late morning, Michael received a call from Dr. Julia Chen, the memory specialist Dr. Carter had recommended. "Mr. Sinclair, I understand you are interested in exploring memory recovery techniques for traumatic retrograde amnesia," she said after introducing herself. "I have an opening tomorrow afternoon if you would like to come in for an initial consultation." "That would be perfect," Michael agreed. "Thank you for accommodating me so quickly." Dr. Carter emphasized the urgency of your situation. Dr. Chen replied, "May I ask what has prompted this interest in recovering memories from 6 years ago?" Michael hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I recently discovered I have a 5-year-old daughter with a woman I cannot remember meeting." There was a momentary silence on the line. I see. That is certainly a compelling reason. I look forward to meeting you tomorrow, Mr. Sinclair. After ending the call, Michael went to find Sophie. She was in the garden with Mrs. Patterson learning the names of various flowers. The sight of her kneeling beside a rose bush, carefully touching the petals as Mrs. Patterson explained something, filled Michael with a strange mixture of joy and grief. Joy at discovering this child who was a part of him. Grief for the years he had missed the moments he would never recover. Dad. Sophie spotted him and waved enthusiastically. The word still startled him. When had she started calling him that? And why did it feel simultaneously foreign and right? Mrs. Patterson is teaching me about flowers, Sophie explained as he approached. Did you know roses have thorns to protect them from animals that want to eat them? They are like plant armor. Plant armor, Michael repeated, smiling. That is a good description. Your daughter has quite a way with words, Mrs. Patterson remarked. She must get that from her mother. Michael nodded, thinking of Rachel, the linguistics professor. Yes, I imagine she does. They spent the afternoon together, Sophie showing him her drawings and telling him stories about the places she had lived with her mother. Denver, where they had an apartment with a balcony. Portland, where it rained almost every day, but the libraries were big and warm. Seattle, where they could see the water and tall buildings. In each story, Michael searched for clues about their life together, about the woman who had raised this bright, resilient child while constantly looking over her shoulder. Mom says we move because we are explorers, Sophie explained when he asked about their frequent relocations. But sometimes she looks sad when we have to pack, and she always checks outside the windows before we go anywhere. That evening, as Michael was helping Sophie prepare for bed, his phone rang. It was the security system at the main gate. Mr. Sinclair, there are several vehicles at the requesting entry. They identify themselves as your family. Michael felt a surge of apprehension. How many vehicles? 3, sir. Shall I grant them access? He considered refusing, but that would only delay the inevitable. Let them in. Inform them I will meet them in the main living room. After instructing Mrs. Patterson to keep Sophie upstairs, Michael went down to await his family. He had barely reached the living room when the front door opened and Victor Sinclair strode in without waiting for the butler to announce him. At 68, Victor remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and piercing blue eyes that had intimidated business rivals for decades. Behind him came Michael's mother, Elizabeth, elegant and reserved as always. Following them were his older brother William with his wife Vanessa and his sister Catherine with her husband James. The entire Sinclair clan assembled like a corporate board ready to vote down a troublesome proposal. Michael, Victor began without preamble. We need to discuss this situation you have created. The situation I created, Michael repeated, his voice deliberately calm. Please enlighten me about my role in this situation. Victor's eyes narrowed at the challenge in his son's tone. This nonsense about a child. Catherine tells me you are claiming to have a daughter you never knew about. That you are accusing us of hiding information about your accident. I am not claiming anything, Michael replied. DNA tests confirm Sophie is my biological daughter. Medical records confirm I suffered amnesia following my accident, losing 14 months of memories. Memories that would have included meeting and forming a relationship with Sophie's mother. Elizabeth stepped forward, attempting a conciliatory tone. Dear, we only did what we thought was best for your recovery. The doctors advised minimal stress and confusion. The doctors advised, Michael corrected, but it was Father who decided what constituted stress and confusion. It was Father who ordered Rachel kept away from me while I was hospitalized. It was Father who chose not to tell me I had lost over a year of memories. Catherine looked uncomfortable, avoiding Michael's gaze. William, always their father's ally, shook his head dismissively. This woman is clearly running a scam, William said. She waits 6 years, then sends a child to your door with a sob story. It is the oldest trick in the book. The DNA test is conclusive, Michael repeated, and she did not send Sophie to extract money or recognition. Rachel is missing. She disappeared from a shopping mall 4 days ago, apparently frightened by something or someone she saw. And you think we had something to do with that? Victor demanded, his voice rising. This is absurd. Is it? Michael challenged. Rachel has been using multiple identities for the past 6 years, constantly moving, looking over her shoulder. Sophie says they move frequently to stay safe from bad people. What did you do to her, Father? Did you threaten her, try to buy her off? A tense silence filled the room. Victor's face flushed with anger, but something in his eyes shifted a momentary flicker that told Michael he had struck close to the truth. "You sure are on a destructive path," Victor finally said, with his voice lower but no less intense. "Getting involved with unsuitable people, jeopardizing the future we had built for you. We did what was necessary." The casual, remorseless admission struck Michael like a physical blow. His suspicions were confirmed. His family had deliberately kept Rachel away during his recovery, exploiting his amnesia to reshape his life according to their vision. "You had no right," Michael said, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "We had every right to protect this family's interests," Victor countered, unmoved. "And that is exactly what we are doing now. This child cannot simply be admitted into the Sinclair name without considering the legal, financial, and public image implications." Michael looked at each of them, his authoritarian father, his passive mother, his arrogant brother, his uncertain sister. The family that had always dictated the terms of his life. "I will say this only once," he declared, his voice steadier than it had ever been when facing his father. "Sophie is my daughter and will stay with me. I will keep searching for Rachel. None of you will interfere in any way." "Michael," Victor began, but Michael cut him off. "If you interfere, if you do anything against Sophie or Rachel, I will cut all ties with this family. My shares in the company, my position as CEO, my name, take it all, but Sophie stays with me." The ultimatum hung in the air like a storm cloud. Victor Sinclair rarely faced resistance, especially from his youngest son, who had always been the most compliant of the three. "You are not thinking clearly," Victor tried again. "That girl only arrived a few days ago. We have been your family for 38 years. And in all those years, when have you ever acted in my real interest?" "Not the Sinclair name's interests," Michael challenged. "Sophie may have arrived recently, but she is more genuine than anyone in this room." Elizabeth stood, looking suddenly weary. "Gerald, perhaps we should give Michael some time. It is clear he has feelings for the child." Victor stared at his son for a long moment, his face a mask of displeasure. Finally, he said, "This is not over, Michael. Once you get over this sentimentality, we will talk again about practical measures to handle this situation." "There is no situation to handle," Michael replied. "There is only a reality you need to accept." The Sinclair family left with the same efficiency they had arrived. Once the last car disappeared down the driveway, Michael felt his shoulders relax as if a physical weight had been lifted. He went upstairs and found Mrs. Patterson sitting outside Sophie's room. "She is asleep, Mr. Sinclair," the housekeeper said softly. "She wanted to wait up for you, but it got too late." Michael nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You can go home now. I will see you in the morning." Quietly, he opened Sophie's door and peered inside. She was indeed asleep, curled around her teddy bear, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. Michael stood watching her for a long moment, marveling at how quickly this small person had upended his carefully ordered existence, and how little he resented the disruption. The following afternoon, Michael took Sophie with him to his appointment with Dr. Julia Chen. He had arranged for Mrs. Patterson to sit with her in the waiting room during his session. Dr. Chen's office was warm and inviting with comfortable furniture and soft lighting. The doctor herself was a woman in her 50s with a calm, thoughtful demeanor. She greeted Michael with a firm handshake and a direct gaze. "Before we begin discussing memory recovery techniques," she said once they were seated, "I want to understand your expectations. Memory is not like a video recording that can simply be replayed. Especially with traumatic amnesia, recovery is often fragmented and incomplete." "I understand," Michael replied. "I am not expecting to recover everything, but there are specific questions I need answered. How I met Rachel, what our relationship was like, why she felt she needed to disappear after my accident." Dr. Chen nodded. "Those are reasonable goals. There are several approaches we can try. One of the most effective involves multisensory stimulation, exposing you to sights, sounds, smells, or tastes that might have been significant during the period you cannot remember." "Like Claire de Lune," Michael murmured. "Sophie said Rachel told her I used to play that piece." "Music can be a powerful trigger," Dr. Chen agreed, "especially music you performed yourself. The muscle memory involved in playing an instrument creates additional neural pathways to the associated memories." "What else might work?" "Visiting locations that were significant to you during that period. The cafe where you may have met Rachel, for instance. Sensory experiences like specific foods or scents, and sometimes hearing stories about the lost period from others who were present can stimulate recall. Sophie has been telling me things Rachel told her about me, Michael said. Small details that feel familiar but do not trigger specific memories. Dr. Chen considered this. Children's perspectives can be valuable, but they are naturally limited. Is there anyone else who might have known you and Rachel as a couple? Michael shook his head. My family deliberately kept her away after my accident, and Rachel has been essentially in hiding for 6 years. If there were mutual friends, I have no way to find them. Then we will work with what we have, Doctor, Chen said pragmatically. Let us start with the music. You mentioned Claire de Lune. Do you still play the piano? Rarely, but I played for Sophie the other night. And did you experience anything unusual while playing, any flashes of memory or strong emotions? Michael thought back to that evening in the music room. Not specific memories, but a feeling, a sense of familiarity that went beyond just knowing the piece, as if I was reaching for something just beyond my grasp. Dr. Chen nodded. That is often how it begins. The emotional response precedes the cognitive recall. I would like you to continue playing regularly. Make it part of your routine again. What else? I want you to try clinical hypnosis, Dr. Chen suggested. It can help access subconscious memories by bypassing some of the barriers your mind has erected. Michael raised an eyebrow. Hypnosis, that sounds rather unscientific. Clinical hypnosis is a well-established technique for accessing repressed or blocked memories, Dr. Chen assured him. It is not the theatrical hypnosis you might see in entertainment. It is more a state of focused relaxation that allows the subconscious mind to communicate more directly. After discussing the details and scheduling regular sessions, Michael left Dr. Chen's office with a sense of cautious hope. In the waiting room, he found Sophie sitting beside Mrs. Patterson, carefully coloring within the lines of a picture book. How was your talk with the doctor? Sophie asked as they walked to the car. It was good, Michael replied. She is going to help me remember things I have forgotten. Like Mom. Yes, like your mom. Sophie nodded seriously. That is important. Mom says memories are like treasures we keep in a special box in our hearts. Michael glanced at her, struck once again by her unexpected wisdom. Your mom sounds very smart. She is the smartest, Sophie agreed with absolute certainty. But she also says sometimes our treasure boxes get locked and we need help finding the key. The metaphor was so apt that Michael wondered if Rachel had been preparing Sophie for this very situation. Had she known that one day her daughter might need to help Michael unlock his memories? That night, Michael dreamed for the first time since Sophie's arrival. He was in a hospital bed, unable to move while a female figure held his hand. He could feel the warmth of her fingers intertwined with his muffled sobs. But when he tried to focus on her face, it stayed blurry, like looking through frosted glass. A male voice, familiar and commanding, spoke from somewhere in the room. My son needs to recover without distractions. I am asking you not to return. The woman's voice choked with tears. Please let me see him. He needs to know I love him. Michael woke with a start, his heart pounding. The dream had felt real, more like a memory than a product of his imagination. The male voice had been unmistakable, the distinctive, authoritative tone of Victor Sinclair. And the woman, though he could not see her face, must have been Rachel. He got up feeling disoriented and walked to the window. Outside, the night was clear, stars visible above the garden. The same view he must have had 6 years ago, yet everything was so different now. A scream tore through his thoughts. Mom! Michael rushed down the hall to Sophie's room. He found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, still trapped in the grip of a nightmare. Sophie, he called softly, sitting beside her. It is me. You are safe. The girl looked at him, blinking in confusion for a moment before recognition dawned. Then, without warning, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. I dreamed Mom was scared. She hiccuped between tears. She was running and calling my name, but I could not reach her. Michael held her awkwardly, feeling her small body tremble against his. It was just a dream, he murmured, though he feared it might be more than that. I want my mom, Sophie sobbed, her voice muffled against Michael's shoulder. I know, he replied, feeling a crushing sense of helplessness. How could he comfort a child whose pain mirrored his own inability to recover his past and find answers? I will find her. He promised, though it was a promise he was not sure he could keep. We will find her together. As he rocked Sophie back to sleep, Michael felt the weight of his own inadequacy. He did not know how to be a father. He did not know how to comfort a frightened child. He had no memories to guide him, no experience to draw upon. All he had were fragments, loose pieces of a puzzle whose final picture he could not imagine. A woman crying in a hospital room. His father barring someone from seeing him. A DNA test confirming Sophie was his daughter. Medical records detailing 14 missing months of his life. Somewhere in that void of memory was Rachel Taylor, the woman who knew the music he played, who had single-handedly raised their daughter for 5 years, who for some reason had needed to send Sophie to him. Now still sitting on Sophie's bed, watching the sleeping face so much like his own, Michael made a silent vow he would find Rachel. He would recover his memories. He would learn the truth no matter how painful it might be. Because for the first time in his adult life, something mattered more than work success or the Sinclair family's expectations. That little girl asleep with tears still drying on her cheeks deserved answers. And if that meant facing the blank space in his own memory, then that was exactly what he would do. The following morning, Michael woke to find Sophie already up, sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by crayons and paper. She was drawing with intense concentration, her tongue sticking out slightly from the corner of her mouth. "What are you drawing?" Michael asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Sophie held up her artwork proudly. It showed 3 stick figures, a small one with brown hair, a taller one in what appeared to be a suit, and a third with long brown hair. Above them was a bright yellow sun, and a big red heart surrounded them all. "It is our family," Sophie explained. "You, me, and Mom, when we are all together again." Michael felt an unexpected surge of emotion. "It is beautiful," he managed to say. "Can I put it on the fridge?" Sophie asked, already grabbing it back. "Mrs. Patterson says that is where families put important drawings." "Of course," Michael replied, watching as she skipped out of the room, the drawing held carefully in front of her. Family. The word had never meant much to Michael. Growing up, family meant stifling expectations and conditional approval. His father, Victor Sinclair, had built a corporate empire and expected Michael to follow that path exactly as planned. His mother, always in her husband's shadow, rarely intervened. The Sinclair family meant success, not affection. But now a 5-year-old girl was redefining that concept for him with a crayon drawing and an unshakable faith that someday they would be complete. Later that morning, Frank called with new information. "Mr. Sinclair, I believe we have found something significant about the cafe connection. The Blue Moon was not just on your route to work. You were a regular customer for nearly a year. The owner remembers you clearly said you came in most mornings." Did she remember Rachel? Yes, though she knew her as Rachel Wilson back then. She said Rachel worked there part-time while finishing her doctorate. According to the owner, you two were quite close. She specifically mentioned that you would often stay to play the cafe's old upright piano after closing time. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The Blue Moon had a piano. He had played there, perhaps Claire de Lune, with Rachel listening. The thought triggered a wisp of memory, the sensation of someone standing behind him as he played, hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Is the cafe still in business?" Michael asked. "No, it closed about 2 years ago, but the building is still there now, housing a bookstore. The owner of the Blue Moon, Sarah Jensen, still lives in the area. She has agreed to meet with you if you wish." "Set it up," Michael said immediately, "as soon as possible." "There is one more thing, sir," Frank continued. "I took the liberty of examining your father's private communication records from 6 years ago." "How did you manage that?" Michael asked, surprised. "I still have contacts in the security division at Sinclair headquarters. What I found confirms your suspicions. In the weeks following your accident, your father hired a private security firm to, and I quote, handle a personal matter. There are references to surveillance and persuasive measures regarding a woman matching Rachel's description." Michael felt a surge of anger. He had her followed, threatened. "It appears so, sir, and it did not stop after she left Seattle. There are payment records to this firm continuing for nearly 2 years afterward." "My father hunted her," Michael said, the realization both shocking and somehow unsurprising. "He drove her into hiding, forced her to keep changing her identity, to keep moving with a young child." The evidence suggests that yes. After ending the call, Michael stood at the window of his office, looking out at the manicured grounds of the Sinclair mansion. Everything he had, his position, his wealth, his carefully ordered life, had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. His father had erased Rachel from his life, exploiting his amnesia to reshape his future according to the Sinclair vision. And Rachel had been alone pregnant, pursued by the resources of a powerful family. She had given birth to Sophie and raised her while constantly looking over her shoulder, never able to settle, never safe. The injustice of it filled Michael with a cold, clarifying rage. His phone rang again. It was Dr. Chen's office confirming their first formal memory recovery session for the following day. Michael agreed to the appointment, then asked if it was possible to include a visit to the former location of the Blue Moon Cafe as part of the therapy. Actually, that is an excellent idea, Dr. Chen told him. Visiting significant locations can be a powerful trigger for memory retrieval. The more sensory information you can engage, the better. As Michael ended the call, he felt a new sense of determination. Tomorrow, he would begin the formal process of reclaiming his lost memories. He would visit the place where apparently he had first met Rachel. And he would finally speak with someone who had known them as a couple who might hold keys to the past that had been stolen from him. Sophie appeared at the office door, the drawing now framed by colorful alphabet magnets on the refrigerator door. "Mrs. Patterson says lunch is ready," she announced. "We are having grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles because they taste better that way." "They absolutely do," Michael agreed, taking her small hand in his. As they walked to the kitchen together, he marveled at how quickly this had become normal, how right it felt to have her hand in his to be planning lunch and therapy sessions and investigations instead of corporate strategies. Somewhere out there, Rachel was still missing, perhaps in danger. But she had sent Sophie to him, trusting that despite everything, despite his amnesia and his family's interference, he would protect their daughter. Now he needed to prove her right. He needed to remember to find her to make whole the family that Sophie had drawn with such certainty. Tomorrow would be another step on that journey, another piece of the puzzle, another fragment of memory waiting to be reclaimed. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the hardwood floor of Michael's bedroom. He had barely slept, his mind racing with fragments of memories, snippets of dreams, and plans for the day ahead. Today would mark a turning point. He could feel it with a certainty that transcended logic. Michael dressed with deliberate care, choosing casual attire rather than his usual business suit. Today was not about Michael Sinclair, the CEO, but Michael the father, the man trying to recover his past. Downstairs, Sophie was already at the breakfast table, legs swinging as she carefully arranged blueberries into a smiling face atop her pancakes. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I made a happy breakfast." "I can see that," Michael replied, pouring himself coffee. "Are we going to find Mom today?" Sophie asked the question she had posed every morning since her arrival. Usually Michael gave a non-committal answer, not wanting to raise her hopes. Today, however, felt different. "I am going somewhere that might help me remember things about your mom," he explained, "a place where we used to meet." Sophie's eyes widened. "Can I come too?" Michael had considered this question extensively the previous night. Dr. Chen had suggested that having Sophie present might actually enhance the memory retrieval process, as the emotional connection could strengthen neural pathways. "Yes," he decided, "you can come with me." The former Blue Moon Cafe was located in a converted Victorian house in one of Seattle's older neighborhoods. The building now housed a bookstore called Turning Page, but the exterior remained largely unchanged from the photographs Frank had shown him. Michael parked across the street, feeling a strange tightness in his chest as he looked at the blue-painted facade with its wide front windows. "Is this where you met Mom?" Sophie asked as they approached the entrance. "I think so," Michael replied, "but I do not remember it yet." Inside, the space had been transformed with bookshelves and reading nooks, but the structure remained visible, the long counter at the back now serving as the cashier station, the bay windows with built-in seating, and in the corner partially hidden by a bookshelf and upright piano. Michael stopped abruptly at the sight of the instrument. A flash of memory hit him like a physical blow, his fingers on those same keys playing as the cafe closed around him. A woman's voice softly humming along. "Mr. Sinclair." A woman in her 60s approached them, her gray hair cut in a stylish bob. "I am Sarah Jensen. We spoke on the phone." Michael extended his hand. Thank you for meeting with us. This is Sophie. Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at the little girl. My goodness, you look just like your mother, especially around the eyes. She led them to a small office at the back of the store, offering Sophie a cookie from a jar on the desk. These are not as good as the ones we used to make at the cafe, but they are not bad. Ms. Jensen owned the Blue Moon Cafe that used to be here, Michael explained to Sophie. She knew your mom and me from before. Back when it was my cafe, your father came in every morning at precisely 7:30, Sarah told Sophie. Always ordered the same thing, double Americano, no sugar. Never spoke much, just nodded a thank you and went to the same corner table with his laptop. That sounds like Dad, Sophie said with such matter-of-fact certainty that both adults smiled. Your mother started working here part-time while finishing her doctoral thesis, Sarah continued. She was brilliant, fluent in 6 languages. Could have worked anywhere, but she said she needed a job where she could think while she worked. Michael leaned forward. How did we meet, Rachel and I? Sarah's eyes twinkled with amusement. She spilled coffee on your expensive suit. It was a disaster. I thought you might demand she be fired on the spot. Instead, you said, do not worry, I hated this tie anyway. It was the first time I had ever seen you smile. The words triggered something in Michael's mind, a flash of memory, a startled face, brown eyes wide with mortification, coffee spreading across his shirt front. She offered to pay for dry cleaning, he said slowly, the memory surfacing like a bubble from deep water. I said no, but she insisted on giving me her phone number just in case the stain did not come out. Sarah nodded, clearly pleased. That is right. It became a running joke between you two. Every time you came in after that, she would ask if the stain had come out yet. Sophie listened to this exchange with rapt attention, absorbing every detail about her parents' first meeting. You started staying later, Sarah continued, and she started taking her breaks when you were there. One evening you noticed our old piano, asked if you could play it. That became another routine. You would stay after closing, sometimes playing while Rachel finished her shift. Claire de Lune, Michael murmured. That was her favorite, Sarah confirmed. She said it reminded her of moonlight on water. Another memory surfaced, Rachel sitting beside him on the piano bench, her shoulder touching his, the cafe empty around them, the smell of coffee and something else, something like vanilla and cinnamon. The last time I saw you both together was about a week before your accident, Sarah concluded. You were talking about a dinner with your family. Rachel was nervous, said your father was intimidating. Did she ever come back here after the accident? Sarah's expression grew somber. Once, about 2 weeks after we heard about your crash. She was distraught, said your family would not let her see you. Then a few days later, she came to tell me she was leaving town. She was crying, Michael. Said someone had made it clear she was not welcome in your life anymore. Is there a piano at your house? Sarah asked suddenly. Yes, Michael replied. Why? You composed something for her, used to play it here sometimes. She called it Rachel's song. She said if you ever forgot everything else, that music would remain in your fingers. On the drive back from the bookstore, Sophie fell asleep in her car seat, emotionally exhausted from the morning's revelations. Michael drove in silence, his mind processing everything Sarah had told them, trying to fit the fragments into a coherent narrative. When they arrived home, Frank was waiting for them with news. Mr. Sinclair, we have a lead on Rachel Taylor, he said, as soon as Michael had settled Sophie with Mrs. Patterson. A woman matching her description checked into a guest house in Port Haven 2 days ago. Port Haven is a small coastal town about 2 hours from here. Michael felt his pulse quicken. Are you certain it is her? The guest house owner confirmed from a photograph. She is registered under the name Rachel Wilson, has paid for a week in advance, and appears to be alone. Port Haven. The name stirred something in Michael's memory. Rachel mentioned a coastal town once, he said slowly. Somewhere she wanted to visit when she had time. Should I assemble a team to approach her? Frank asked. Michael considered the question carefully. No. If she sees multiple people approaching, she might run again. I will go myself with Sophie. You and 2 security personnel can follow at a distance as backup. Frank nodded. When do you want to leave? Michael glanced at his watch. It was already late afternoon. First light tomorrow. Have everything ready by 5 a.m. That night, after putting Sophie to bed with promises of seeing her mother the next day, Michael went to the music room. He sat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys, thinking about what Sarah had said. Rachel's song. a piece he had composed himself. He began with Claire de Lune, letting the familiar melody center him. Then, without consciously deciding to change his fingers, shifted to a different progression, something slower, more intimate. Michael closed his eyes, letting his hands remember what his mind could not. The melody that emerged was simple but haunting, a conversation between bass and treble, like two people speaking to each other across a crowded room. He had never played this piece before, not in the 6 years since his accident, yet his fingers knew exactly where to go. As the final notes faded, Michael opened his eyes to find Sophie standing in the doorway, teddy bear clutched to her chest. "That is Mom's song," she whispered. "She hums it sometimes when she thinks I am asleep." Michael stared at his daughter, a wave of emotion washing over him. "You know this song?" Sophie nodded. "Mom says you made it just for her, that it was like having a piece of you with us wherever we went." Michael held out his hand and Sophie came to sit beside him on the bench. "We are going to find her tomorrow," he promised. "We are going to bring her home." The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when they departed the next morning. Sophie, still in her pajamas, had been transferred sleepily to the car with her teddy bear and blanket. Michael drove with Frank, following in a separate vehicle with 2 security personnel. The coastal highway was nearly empty at that hour, allowing them to make good time toward Port Haven. As they drove, Sophie gradually woke up, her excitement growing as Michael explained they were going to the town where they believed her mother was staying. "Will she be surprised to see us?" Sophie asked, bouncing slightly in her seat. "I think she will be very happy to see you," Michael replied, "but also a little surprised, yes." "Is she still running from the bad people?" Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I do not know, Sophie, but if she is, she does not have to run anymore. We will protect her now." They arrived in Port Haven just after 7:30. It was a picturesque coastal town, the kind featured on postcards, with a small harbor, quaint shops, and historic buildings. The Harbor View Guest House sat on a bluff overlooking the water, a converted Victorian mansion with a broad porch and gabled windows. Frank had gone ahead to confirm Rachel was still there, reporting back that she had been seen having coffee on the rear terrace just 20 minutes earlier. Michael parked a short distance away, not wanting to alert Rachel to their presence prematurely. "Here is the plan," he told Sophie as they walked toward the guest house. "We will ask the owner, which room is your mom's? Then we will go and knock on her door. Does that sound okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly, clutching his hand with a ferocity that betrayed her nervousness. The guest house owner, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up as they entered. Her gaze immediately went to Sophie, recognition flashing across her face. "You are here for the young woman in room 8. She said, not a question, but a statement. Michael nodded. "Is she here now?" "On the back terrace having her morning coffee. She does that every day, watching the water." The woman smiled at Sophie. "She has your picture on her nightstand, sweetie. I could tell right away you were her little girl." Sophie beamed at this confirmation that her mother kept her close even when they were apart. The owner pointed them toward a side door that led to the terrace. Michael felt a strange mix of anticipation and fear as they approached. What would Rachel think when she saw him? Would she run again? Would she even want to see him after everything that had happened? The terrace was small, overlooking the harbor below. A solitary figure sat at a table near the railing. Her back to them, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Her hair was shorter than in the photographs Michael had seen, but the slope of her shoulders, the way she held herself, sent a jolt of recognition through him. Sophie dropped his hand and ran forward. "Mom!" The woman turned, her coffee cup slipping from her fingers and shattering on the wooden boards. Her face, finally visible to Michael, sent a wave of memories crashing through his mind. The cafe, the piano, an apartment with books piled on every surface, laughter, arguments, reconciliations. The last night before his accident, a dinner with his parents that had ended in bitter words. "Sophie," Rachel's voice was disbelieving, choked with emotion. Sophie launched herself into her mother's arms. Rachel clutched her daughter tightly, closing her eyes as tears streamed down her face. She looked thinner than in Michael's newly recovered memories, dark circles under her eyes speaking of prolonged stress. But the relief radiating from her was palpable, like someone breathing again after nearly drowning. Then, still holding Sophie, she lifted her eyes to meet Michael's. The moment their gazes locked, Michael felt as if an electrical current had passed through him. The remaining barriers in his mind crumbled, releasing a flood of memories so intense he nearly staggered. Their first date at a small Italian restaurant, the night he had given her the key to his apartment, the weekend trip to the coast where he had first told her he loved her, the ring hidden in his desk drawer waiting for the right moment, the argument with his father, Victor, shouting that Rachel was beneath the Sinclair name. Driving away in fury, the rain lashing his windshield, the car skidding on wet pavement. Michael. Rachel said his name on her lips, sounding oddly familiar, like a distant echo of something he had heard 1,000 times before. Rachel, he answered, feeling the strangeness of addressing someone who was simultaneously a stranger and the most familiar person in the world. Sophie, still in her mother's arms, looked from one to the other, expectantly waiting for whatever came next. Rachel, realizing they were still on the public terrace, stepped back. "Come inside," she said, her tone cautious. "Please." Her room was small and impersonal. A single bed, a tiny table, an old wardrobe. A backpack sat open in the corner, and some papers were scattered on the table, the only real signs of occupation. Rachel had turned anonymity into an art form. "Are you okay, Mom?" Sophie asked, studying her mother's face with concern. "I am now," Rachel replied, hugging her again. Then reluctantly she turned to Michael. "How did you find me?" "I have had a team searching for you since the day Sophie showed up," he said. "Why did you run? Why send Sophie to me without explaining?" Rachel hesitated, glancing meaningfully at her daughter. Michael understood. "Sophie, would you mind going with my friend Frank to get us some breakfast? I bet they have pancakes somewhere in town." The girl looked uncertainly between her parents. "But I just found Mom." "I will be here when you get back, I promise," Rachel assured her, stroking her hair. "I need to talk to your dad for a moment." After Sophie left with Frank, a tense silence filled the room. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, looking suddenly exhausted. "You do not remember me, do you?" she finally asked. "I did not until very recently," Michael replied honestly. "I had an accident 6 years ago. I lost memories from the 14 months before the crash." "And now," Rachel asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Now I remember enough," Michael said. "The Blue Moon Claire de Lune, the song I composed for you. I remember giving you the key to my apartment. I remember the fight with my father the night of the accident." Rachel studied him, her expression guarded, but with a hint of hope. "What else do you remember?" "That I loved you," Michael said simply. "That we were planning a future together." Rachel's composure faltered slightly. "I tried, Michael. I tried so many ways to reach you after the accident. Letters, phone calls. I even showed up at your office once. Your father's security team escorted me out. And then you found out you were pregnant," he concluded. Rachel nodded. "2 months after I gave up trying to see you. When I tried again with that news, your father sent his lawyers. They offered money to disappear. When I refused, things happened. I lost my job. My apartment mysteriously caught fire. I got the message." Michael felt a surge of anger toward his father and guilt for what Rachel had endured. "So you ran." "I ran to protect our daughter," Rachel corrected him. "I moved constantly, changing names, pushed cities, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid they would find us." "For 6 years," Michael murmured. "You raised our daughter alone on the run for 6 years. Why send her to me now?" Rachel rubbed her tired face. "2 months ago, I noticed we were being followed again. I knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up to us, so I made the hardest decision of my life. Sending Sophie to you." Rachel nodded, tears silently running down her cheeks. "You were the only one who could protect her if something happened to me. I knew that if she made it to you, not even your father would dare harm her." Michael moved closer, sitting beside her on the bed. "I have confronted my father. I made it clear that Sophie stays with me, and anyone who does not accept that is no longer part of my life." Rachel looked up surprised. "You would choose us over your family, over everything." "I already have," Michael replied simply. When Sophie returned with Frank and breakfast from a local diner, she found her parents sitting closer together, talking quietly. The tension had not entirely disappeared, but something had shifted and understanding reached. "Look, Mom, I got chocolate chip pancakes," Sophie announced, her normalcy a balm to the emotionally charged atmosphere. As they ate together in the small room, Michael watched Rachel and Sophie interact, the easy affection between them, the shorthand of people who had relied solely on each other for years. This was his family, not the cold, controlling dynasty of the Sinclair name. What happens now? Rachel asked as they finished eating. First, we ensure your safety, Michael replied. Frank has confirmed that the men following you were indeed hired by my father. That stops today. Then we figure out the rest together. Rachel nodded slowly. I have been running for so long, I am not sure I remember how to stay in one place. We will learn together, Michael promised. They left Port Haven that afternoon, Rachel's few belongings packed in her backpack, Sophie chattering excitedly between them about all the things she wanted to show her mother at the big house. Michael drove occasionally, glancing in the rearview mirror to assure himself that this was real, that they were both really there. As they approached Seattle, Michael's phone rang. It was Catherine. Michael, I need to warn you. Father knows you have found Rachel. He is at your house now with Mother William and the others. They arrived about an hour ago. Michael felt a surge of protectiveness. Thank you for the warning. We will handle it. Rachel, who had overheard the conversation, looked anxious. Your family is waiting for us. Maybe this is not a good idea. Michael reached across to take her hand. No more running, remember. It is time they faced the consequences of their actions. When they arrived at the Sinclair mansion, 3 luxury cars were parked in the circular driveway. Michael helped Sophie from the car, then extended his hand to Rachel, who hesitated before taking it. Stay behind me, he told her quietly. Inside, the entire Sinclair family was assembled in the living room. Victor and Elizabeth William and his wife Catherine and her husband. They all looked up as Michael entered, their expressions changing from expectation to shock as they saw Rachel and Sophie following him. So it is true, Victor said, rising from his seat. You found her. No, thanks to you, Michael replied coldly. For 6 years you have terrorized the mother of my child, forcing her to live in fear, depriving me of my daughter and her of her father. We did what was necessary to protect the family name, Victor insisted, though his confidence seemed diminished by the direct confrontation. Necessary. Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite her obvious tension. Was it necessary to threaten a pregnant woman, to make her fear for her child's safety, to deny your own granddaughter? Victor shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. You were not suitable. A relationship with you would have derailed Michael's future. My future, Michael interjected, which you decided should not include the woman I loved or the child we created together. You exploited my amnesia to reshape my life according to your vision. Elizabeth, visibly distressed, turned to Rachel. We did not know you were pregnant. Victor never told me. Would it have made a difference? Rachel asked quietly. Elizabeth had no answer for that. I want to be very clear about what happens now. Michael continued, addressing the entire room. Rachel and Sophie are my family. They will live here with me, or we will all live elsewhere together. Anyone who cannot accept that is no longer welcome in my life. Catherine stepped forward, approaching Sophie. Hello, Sophie. I am your Aunt Catherine. She knelt to the child's level. I have a daughter about your age. I think you two would be great friends. Sophie looked to her mother for guidance. Rachel gave a small nod. Does she like to draw? Sophie asked Catherine. She loves to draw, Catherine replied with a genuine smile. Maybe you could show her sometime. Elizabeth moved forward, next her eyes moist as she looked at her granddaughter. She has your eyes, Michael, she observed softly. Victor remained rigid, but something in his expression had changed. The certainty that had defined his actions for decades was fracturing before the reality of his grandchild. This is not over, he said, but the words lacked their usual commanding force. Yes, it is, Michael replied firmly. The question is whether you want to be a grandfather or a stranger to this child. That choice is yours, but the consequences will be too. 3 months later, Michael stood on the deck of a beach house overlooking the Pacific. After the confrontation with his family, he had purchased this property, a modern home with large windows facing the ocean and a small garden where Sophie could play. It felt more like a home than any place he had lived before. The transition had not been simple. Victor remained distant, though he had ceased his opposition. Elizabeth and Catherine had embraced their new roles as grandmother and aunt. Sophie had started at a local school, thriving in the stability. Rachel had accepted a position teaching linguistics at a nearby university starting in the fall. As for Michael and Rachel, they had been cautiously rebuilding their relationship, rediscovering each other day by day. Rachel had taken the guest bedroom, both of them acknowledging that they needed time before resuming their relationship fully. Michael heard the sliding door open behind him and turned to see Rachel approaching, holding something in her closed hand. "Sophie is finally asleep," she said. "3 bedtime stories tonight." Michael smiled. "Let me guess. The bear finding his family, the princess who saves herself, and the magical piano." "You know her well already," Rachel replied, a note of wonder in her voice. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. "I found this while unpacking the last boxes," Rachel said, opening her hand to reveal a small ring with a simple diamond in white gold. "I kept it all these years." Michael stared at the ring, now completely familiar. "I was going to give it to you the weekend after the accident. I had it all planned out. Dinner at that Italian place, then a walk along the water." Rachel closed her hand around the ring again. "We are different people now." "Yes," Michael agreed, "but maybe better people." Rachel studied him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I like who you are becoming." From inside came the sound of small feet padding across the floor. They turned to see Sophie, rumpled from sleep, teddy bear dangling from one hand. "I had a dream about us," she announced, rubbing her eyes. "We were having a picnic on the beach and Dad was playing the piano, except the piano was made of sand." Rachel picked up her daughter, holding her close. "That sounds like a wonderful dream." "Can we have a real picnic tomorrow?" Sophie asked, nestling against her mother's shoulder. "Absolutely," Michael promised, "with sandwiches cut into triangles." "Because they taste better that way," Sophie and Rachel said in unison, dissolving into giggles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the beach, Michael made a decision. He looked at the ring in Rachel's palm, then at her face illuminated in the fading light. "I think the time is right now," he said softly. He knelt on the deck before her, holding the ring. "Rachel Wilson, 6 years ago, I chose this ring because I knew you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. I lost those memories once, but I found my way back to you. I do not want to waste another day. Will you marry me?" Sophie clapped her hands with delight as Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophie threw her arms around both of them, completing their circle. The family that had been broken was whole again, stronger for having survived the fractures. The future stretched before them, no longer shadowed by fear or loss, but bright with possibility. Whatever came next, they would face it together, their broken fragments finally reunited into something whole and beautiful and strong.